Welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. Founded in 1976 by 13 visionary women leaders, CMC's mission is to connect people and ideas through community conversation. To carry out its mission, CMC explores policy issues, current events, lessons in leadership each and every Wednesday. And as Jane would say, there's a Wednesday in every week. From its beginning, CMC welcomes everyone. Hi, I'm Tony Bell, President and CEO of Phoenix Consulting Company, a leadership learning and development organization. I'm also a member of the Board of Trustees and a lifetime member. And thank you to today's forum sponsors, Accenture, Steptoe and Johnson. I love saying that name, Steptoe and Johnson, and the Columbus Partnership. I don't have anything amazing to say about Accenture except it's got an accent because they put the accent on all the good work. There you go. Today's live stream is presented by the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch. So, if you would join me in a round of applause to thank all of our supporters of today's forum. So chances are many of us don't think much about electricity, except the fact that we notice it when it doesn't come on. But at the flick of the switch and our internet coming on, being able to turn on the stove, all of those things that we do on a daily basis, but take for granted. But the complexities of power generation, transmission, and distribution are mysteries to many Ohioans, but power is everywhere. And they pioneer the power that matters. They're not only mysteries today, they are not mysteries to today's speakers. No, they're not. Recent power outages have put Ohio's grid in the news, but larger challenges await Ohio's power industry as new factories come to our state, more drivers opt for electric cars, as do I, and climate change raises global temperatures. Today, we'll explore Ohio's electric future from AEP's perspective. So please welcome Julie Ignagne from today's sponsor, Accenture, to introduce today's speakers. Julie, the podium is yours. Welcome.
Thank you, Tony. Appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here with the Columbus Metropolitan Club and all of you here in attendance today. It's always so good to actually see faces. I'm Julie Ignagne, and I'm a managing director with Accenture, and I'm our client account lead for American Electric Power. I've had the honor to spend my entire career at Accenture, 24 years working in the utilities industry. Wow, these are exciting times. As Tony mentioned, the complexities of the utilities industry with electricity brings us so much opportunity. I'm excited to listen and learn from these key leaders in our community to discuss what's important and top of mind for most everyone, power. If you, your families, your friends, and colleagues are listening and observing everything that's happening in our environment today, a big focus is on energy. Powering the grid, decarbonization, electrification, and continued reliability and resiliency of our electric infrastructure. Sometimes I think our kids are going to have electric vehicles before we do. I couldn't think of a time more interesting than now to be working in the utilities industry, and I'm excited to hear about what this means for Ohio's electric future. Please extend a warm welcome to Nick Akins, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of AEP, Marc Reitter, President and Chief Operating Officer of AEP Ohio, and our host and moderator, Andy Chow, News Editor with the State News Bureau. If you don't already know them, there's more information in your forum flyer. Andy, we look forward to today's conversation.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
Well, thanks everyone for being here. And like Julie said, my name's Andy Chow. I'm the news editor for the Ohio Public Radio and Television State House News Bureau. We provide content to all of Ohio's NPR stations and PBS stations. And I've been covering the issue of utilities and energy for 10 years now. It was the first beat I was given when I first came to the State House as a reporter. And I said, I don't know what that is. I don't know what utilities are. I don't know what the PUCO is, and I don't want to know. But then after a while, I started to realize when you really dive deep into the issue, the things, I mean, I'll try not to say this too much, but it could sound dull and maybe boring at times. But when you really hear about what the actual impact is, it's incredibly important. And when it comes to the issues that we cover at the State House, I can't think of many other issues that can really have as much of a widespread impact as energy and utilities. We all pay our electric bills. We all look down the list of bills and say, what is this fee and why am I paying it? And so now you can ask all these guys that. So I'm very glad to be here. I find energy and utilities a very important issue, and I think this topic of energy's future is so important too. I wanted to hand it over to Nick first. Nick, you've been CEO of AEP for 11 years. With the company for 40 years, you just told me. Right. We have a lot to talk about, but I first want to just hand it over to you. With all this experience over so many years, what are some of the key lessons that you've learned in the industry?
Oh, Andy, there's so many. I'll just distill it down in a couple. One is, you know, as we've progressed as a company over the last 40 years, there's been so many things that have happened relative to energy. And I can recall when I first started 40 years ago, no one really had any indication at all how the system worked or even thought about it. And even the president of the company would rarely come down to, you know, I started out in the dispatch operations and we'd rarely see him unless something was going on with the system. And today, it's in the paper every day about what's going on relative to energy, not only internationally, but in the state of Ohio and the country as well with our company. And there's so many things that have changed. Electrification has certainly changed over the years, where we're so dependent upon electricity in so many ways. And now, post-COVID, certainly with the environment that exists today, the office may actually be the home. And so we have to really think about the resiliency and reliability of the grid as a result. As a CEO, I've learned that culture of a corporation is extremely important. I mean, AEP has a 116-year history of strong engineering professions, but also focused on assets. That changed over the years. The focus is on people because that's what makes a company run and gives it the agility that it needs. We were, in 2014, this was Gallup had done a study, a culture survey for us, and we were at the 14th percentile, which was the lower fourth quartile. Today, we're at the 93rd percentile, and the aggressiveness at which we've approached the cultural aspects has really provided even further focus on the ingenuity and the ability for this company to continue to progress. Now we're integrally involved with a lot of policy-related issues, not only within the state, but the country as well, that really defines the future in terms of how we use the product that we deliver, but also ensuring the resiliency and reliability. I looked at this like 116 years ago when this company started. It was just a matter of providing electricity to consumers, because a lot of consumers didn't even have it. Today, that standard's changed. It has to be a focus on resiliency and reliability for everyone, not just the people who can afford it. And so things have changed so much over the years that it really has enabled me to see the growth of the industry, see the growth of AEP, the culture of AEP, and I have no doubt that we'll continue to flourish in the future under the leadership of Julie Sloat, who is in the audience, who will take over as CEO at the first of the year. And I would have to say, too, that I've also learned as a CEO, 10 years ago as a CEO is very different than being one today. All the social issues that have occurred, all the environmental issues that have occurred over these past years have made it a daunting task to be a CEO in this industry, particularly when outages may occur and those kinds of things that people don't quite understand, and the decision process that's made around it. I'm sure we'll talk about that, but certainly as we look forward to electrification, it's going to be a lot of opportunity for our industry, but we'll have to deliver on that opportunity that exists.
And Marc, not quite 40 years with the company at this point, but
half that.
yeah,
Half that, yeah.
I mean, in the time that you've been at AEP, what are some of your key takeaways so far with the company?
Yeah, I think for me, came in at the very bottom, and you see the company. Nick, when Julie now will be my fourth CEO, when I came into the company, and you see the change in leadership and the focus. And Nick hit it on culture. It's a much more accountable culture, much more transparent culture, much more a culture devoted to community. I think that's an important aspect we'll probably talk about. But yeah, it's just and for me to be where I'm at now, it's a privilege and an honor to lead AEP Ohio through the good times and the bad times. So excited to be here today.
Great. Now the topic of the forum is Ohio's electric future, but before we can talk about the future, I think it's important to look at the past a little bit. I know it's been kind of referenced already here, but the events that happened in June with the storms and then the outages, Marc, you were actually in front of the PUCO to talk about some of these things. I'm sure a lot of people are pretty caught up on the basics, but what did the company learn, what did AEP learn when it comes to reliability during the string of events through severe storms, power lines that were downed, and then having to do forced outages?
Yeah, I think we all recognize what the team already knew, that the service we provide is essential and makes life possible. And when customers can't rely on electricity, especially in light of COVID, now more people at home working from home, there's more dependency on it. With respect to the emergency action, I think it's important to note too, the operators in those control rooms executed those emergency orders exactly how they were designed, as challenging as that was for our customers. And we, on AEP Ohio side, we lost 2 service centers. Those are garages where our distribution line workers work out of that are dispatched out. In the backup generation at those facilities failed. So we learned a little bit about that. Nick probably didn't know that. But I think, yeah. So operationally, in Nick's seen what's in our industry is called load sheds. You've seen these load sheds before, and the uniqueness with this one was the magnitude and the location in an urban environment, urban center. And so we learned a lot on the communications piece, but it's given us an opportunity to connect in a much deeper way with our community. We had the opportunity to have a town hall discussion with that the NAACP Columbus chapter organized, which was really, really important, and we learned a lot from that. And we're actually continuing that discussion Monday when a lot of community officials are coming in our building. I'm going to talk more about how customers expect us to communicate, and back to the signaling thing, because we only had 5 minutes from an operational perspective to react to the emergency. But we could have signaled. The challenge in this case was you had a derecho on top of another derecho, and then you combine that with extreme heat. And I don't know if it's because I sit in the role, I pay more attention to the weather now.
Both of you pointed out the weather when we were up here. You said it's nice weather.
Yeah.
So you're probably
I do sleep better at night when it's 75. Yeah. But the following week, I think it's important to recognize that once the restoration and the lines were cleared and back in service, the following week we had the same heat index, and the grid handled it. So I think it's important to recognize that.
If I could add to that, because I've been adding and no one will let me talk publicly about it, but I really want to give you my impression, because I grew up in system operations and interconnected power system operations, and for me, I can probably count on one hand the number of load shedding events that we've had in our territories. And usually load shedding occurs, summer heat is coming, so you can make public appeals and those types of things, and if necessary, do rotating brownouts to accommodate those kinds of events that may occur. This was a very different situation. You had 2 derechos that came through overnight in the early morning hours. And actually, they fragmented and carpet bombed the underlying transmission and sub-transmission level that provides load to customers. So specific areas of the system were pretty well torn up. So the race was on to reestablish service at a time where that day you had 115 heat index. So it's almost like having somebody run a marathon with clogged arteries, and it becomes not a good situation. And so when you think about the rehabilitation of the grid that was occurring, it was being pieced back together to accommodate the large load increases of serving the demands of the day. And the next day, actually, you had to evaluate, what could be done. And obviously in this situation, it was a short-term nature, but it also specific focused on certain circuits. Because it's like veins in the body. I mean, there's smaller veins that go out all over the neighborhoods and all that kind of stuff. And when that happens, the ability to respond to that is limited for certain circuits, and it's done by the laws of physics. There's no selection process other than typically load shedding schemes will have certainly the circuits associated with hospitals, water and sewer activities, those kinds of things. And so it's really important for us to be able to go through that process in a safe way. By the way, safety is obviously a big part. We did have a fatality in West Virginia in the restoration efforts, and you always think about that when you're bringing people together to rehabilitate the grid. It's a dangerous situation and something we have to really take advantage of. And so that fragmented system was all the way from Fort Wayne all the way down to West Virginia in our territories. And we serve 11 states, so all those territories were affected. And it was a pretty substantial event that occurred. To me, it raises some issues, what I've learned, and that is that we need to make sure, as we redefine resiliency and reliability, because electrification is definitely a requirement now, we really have to redefine that level of resiliency and reliability for everyone, not just the people who can afford it. Because people who have backup generation or have other larger homes or things that they can do to go somewhere else during that time, that's one thing. But when you're hitting urban areas and you have individuals who may have just used their paycheck to put food in their refrigerator or their freezer and nowhere to go, we have to make absolutely sure that we're putting a system in place that provides that supporting structure for everyone. And that's something from an Ohio public policy perspective, and actually from a national policy perspective, needs to be addressed.
So that's just like one of the lingering questions for me out there. Marc, I heard you explain it to the PUCO about how PJM, it was a load shed directive. You had 5 minutes. It was at the Marion substation, and shutting out that station, and I might use the wrong lingo, so feel free to correct me, but shutting off that substation means that shut off power to a lot of neighborhoods that tend to be low income, communities of color. Is there something to be said for why was that neighborhood the neighborhood that was vulnerable at the time? Was it just how things happened, or is there something about those neighborhoods where resiliency or reliability needs to be built up so it's not as vulnerable next time around?
Yeah, so I think there's two parts to that, Andy. Let me be clear too. Just about every neighborhood in Central Ohio is impacted by this, so it wasn't unique to one community or the other, or one part of the county or the other. Like Nick said, it's physics, and so you have supply and demand. And as the temperatures are rising, those substations are big substations, serve a lot of customers. Call Road, Morse Road, those are big substations. And it was purely based on there's a lot of demand because of the weather. And what you're trying to do to prevent, you're overloading the lines that are still operating. And so what we didn't want to happen is what happened in 2003, where you had a blackout from here to all the way to New York City, 50 million people. That's the cascading type events that are catastrophic that you're preventing by executing on these emergency orders. But yeah, look, we recognize what occurred. And the other uniqueness thing, it was like today was a blue sky day. Nobody knew what was happening. And kind of bring it back to the communications piece. That's what we're going to get fixed.
Nick, you mentioned the importance of public policy. huge public policy measures have just passed in Congress the past week. There's the infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act that pumps a whole lot of money into climate change reforms. There's a lot of stuff going on there, including a lot of tax credits, hundreds of billions of dollars to build up the renewable energy industry and the EV industry. What are some of your key takeaways from all the different measures that are coming out from Congress?
Yeah, so obviously there's been a lot of focus on Congress as they've gone through. Matter of fact, the President just signed the legislation yesterday that provided for a lot of the clean energy credits. There's no doubt that we're moving toward a clean energy economy. Our customers expect it, our investors expect it, but we have to do it in a way that certainly supports the resiliency and the reliability of the grid. There's expansion of, in that legislation, not only do you have extension of the production tax credits and investment tax credits for solar and wind, but also expansion for storage, small modular nuclear reactors, those types of technologies that are coming into play that provide us the ability to provide some backbone to the system, but still providing clean energy. So those are areas where we have to continue to focus on to ensure that we are able to make this transition in a credible way that ensures the reliability and resiliency. You can't do it alone. Matter of fact, you can't do it alone with just transmission. Now, we have the largest transmission system in the country by far. And it's a big part of our business, and I'm probably speaking against my book at this point, but you can't supply Central Ohio and Columbus with extension cords. You really do have to have resources in place that provide that backbone. It's like having a pumping station for water. You really do have to have that kind of source in place. We used to have Pickway and Conesville and Muskingum River were all electrically close to Columbus. We do have I don't want to overstate this, and we do have a great transmission network that's planned for a certain level of contingencies that exist. But now, if you have much more frequent storm activity and more severe storm activity, we have to look at not only the level of protection on the transmission grid itself, but also we need to be able to use these kinds of resources, whether it's microgrids, whether it's other types of opportunities in neighborhoods to ensure that we have that kind of backup supply. And when you think about Ohio policy, this policy started 10 years ago when we went to deregulation, where it was left to the market where generation went. Well, today, 25% of the capacity and energy that this state consumes is from out of state. And because you don't have a long-term investment capability for us to put that kind of generation in place. We need to have some semblance of that to continue on. And as a matter of fact, Ohio really can't take advantage of some of the things in the legislation. Small modular reactors, for example, take a large investment over a long period of time, but the market is not built in Ohio to support that kind of investment. So we need to make sure that those changes are occurring. That way, I'm not saying get rid of the market. I'm just saying we have to define what that level is from a resiliency perspective. And the Public Utility Commission of Ohio is actually already working on some of that with the microgrid pilots and other things that are being done to enable us to focus on the future. We just need to make sure we move much more quickly because these storms that are impacting the area, we have to solve the situation and ensure that we're more resilient.
Marc, what would that look like? Are we talking, and Nick, feel free to jump in too, but are we talking about deregulation at that point, or what does it look like from an Ohio perspective to try to take advantage of what Nick's talking about?
Yeah, Nick will have lots to say on this. I think I'll speak to it in terms of resiliency because that's my main concern is the reliability and the resiliency of the service we're providing at distribution level. But what Nick's talking about is that extra layer of generation, efficient generation, funded in part by these programs set up through the legislation that would provide some additional layers of resiliency. And Nick mentioned the microgrids. So we've got two that we've been piloting. The commission gave us authority to do that a few years ago. They're both in service. One's at the Columbus Zoo, which we love our animals, except for squirrels. And so that's solar coupled with battery storage. So that's live, and then we're also, the other pilot's Athens wastewater treatment plant. So again, that's a critical kind of service, and we're testing it out. We're learning from it, and I think you can see us advance additional proposals in the future.
You can't understand the impact, underestimate the impact of big data analytics and its ability for us to look at technologies and put technologies in place where we can have much more information about the grid and be able to respond much more quickly. And distributed energy resources, which is really small-scale generation, is coming about in a dramatic sense. And it's an opportunity for us to target, whether it's storage, whether it's those kinds of applications, whether it's microgrids, to redefine how we deliver service to our customers. Historically, it's been defined just by that distribution line that goes in the home. Well, that's not enough anymore. We need to make sure that people can run the facilities, the appliances and other things in their homes and endure through those types of outages. And that's really important for us to rethink how the grid continues to operate. We have the analytical capability, we have the technology. It's a matter of the legislation and the regulations to catch up to where the world is today. I can tell you, we also serve Texas, and everybody knows there was a huge storm in Texas. And that was legislation that was done at the turn of the century when you knew what generation was, transmission, distribution. Today, that's all convoluted. With distributed energy resources, all those things that were defined as generation resources, well, they're more applicable to the transmission system or distribution, particularly on the customer end. So we have to really rethink that. And Ohio certainly has a role in that as well, because they followed some of that legislation that needs to be changed as we go forward.
And I want to try to simplify what we're talking about, and I'll pretend it's for them, but it's actually for me. But I mean, when we're talking about moving towards a more electrified future, we have to plug in our refrigerator. We have to plug in so many things inside our home. And I guess if we're talking about a future running off of electric vehicles, that's just another thing that we're plugging into our house. Is that what we're talking about here, that the demand is expected to go much higher? And so where does a transmission company fall into all that?
Absolutely. There's with electrification, including electric vehicles. And by the way, electric vehicles ultimately, and today even with Ford, Jim Hackett was here last time. He was really looking forward to the area where automobiles can actually supply some of the energy to the home. It's those kinds of things that we have to be able to work through the process to make sure that there is some congruency in terms of our ability to serve the supplies during those kinds of outages. And with the changes that are occurring today, we have that ability to do. It's just a matter of focusing on the technologies and infrastructure to make that happen.
Yeah, so I'll just supplement Nick's response. Andy, so think of it like in the early 1940s, maybe the 50s, the mass marketing or adoption of electric dryers, clothes dryers. That adoption happened pretty quick, I think, relative to how you might expect the EV adoption. So right now, EV adoption, and we expecting a gradual transition, but doesn't mean we're not planning for an accelerated transition. Right now, 5% of U.S. New car sales are EVs. China's 25%. And we're actually modeling every feeder level distribution on the distribution side of the system to understand where the capacity needs are going to be. In the event you get clustering of EVs. And another kind of unknown is some of the capabilities that these cars will provide your home when you think about vehicle to home technology. And what role that could have played in the forced outage situation.
I think the electric vehicle side is continuing to advance and accelerating dramatically. And obviously this legislation will continue to enable that acceleration. There's no question that as we move forward, electric vehicles, the range anxiety will be taken out. With battery technologies continuing to improve, and also we've been involved and started an electric vehicle coalition among the utilities in the U.S. That is focusing on the planning associated with putting charging stations at various locations in the interstate corridors so that that range anxiety can be taken away. And so that's really important. I mean, it's sort of a build it and they will come type of thing, but there is distinct advantages to electric vehicles. I have one. It's great in the cold weather to drive by a gas station and wave by, but also we have to absolutely make electric vehicles affordable, and it does no good for someone who can't afford even the initial cost of an electric vehicle unless we can make that kind of transition, and that's something obviously that we're focused on.
Sorry, one more supplementary response here. I think we're very lucky to have great partners too. So when you think about Smart Columbus and that initiative and that partnership and the advancement of electric vehicles and how the community embraces electric vehicles has been critical. And then you have a partnership like with CODA, for example. And Joanna and the team have been executing incredibly. They just this week, I think, received a $27 million grant to help electrify their fleet. And so that's exciting, and we've been talking to them about how to plan for that capacity along the way. And then we've also made our own commitments to electrify our cars and light-duty trucks. So it's exciting, but we're it's going to be you're going to lean on partnerships and your customers and working with your customers.
So when you look at the investments that are being made in renewable energy, into production tax credits for solar and wind, are you saying that states where the utilities can be distribution and transmission and generation will benefit more? Is there a benefit that you're saying Ohio is going to be missing out on because you have to be separate? You don't have generation along with your distribution.
I think there's certainly a role for both, but we're in what we call integrated regulated jurisdictions where we still have generation. 9.5 of our states are still integrated regulated. Part of Texas is unregulated in Ohio. And so when you think about what we learned during Storm Uri, that's the major Texas storm. It was important for the communication between the load-serving entities in that state, which was primarily the distribution providers, to talk to the generation providers. A lot of that communication didn't exist. So things that we could have done on the grid side, we weren't aware of because we didn't know where the generation was coming from. And so that integration of the grid is extremely important, and we've learned that. And actually, when we plan for our systems, we just built the largest wind power project in North America that went online. It's about half the size of Rhode Island, by the way. And it actually has a huge benefit for consumers because we put into that system winterization packages that enable them to run, but also as you look at the hedging of fuel costs, to have those kinds of resources in place during times where natural gas prices shot out the roof is a huge benefit to consumers. So that kind of thing has to be thought through. I think there has to be opportunities, and here in Ohio, you really don't have the opportunity for the utility to engage in the building of renewables for the benefit of all customers. We're actually doing contracts with corporations, businesses, that kind of thing in Ohio, but overall, we're precluded from doing. So I think there's an opportunity there.
So is that something that you would like the state legislature to take a look at and consider opening that door a little bit?
Yeah, actually, we attempted to get some of that in HB 6 because we saw that yeah, I know it's a bad word now. Is sort of a bad word then, we found out, but nevertheless, the renewables part of it was clearly important to us, and but at that time the commission was not interested in that. So so it was really it's really a focus of ours to work with the regulators to enable that to happen.
Andy actually did a real nice piece on that filing, Nick, back in 2019. We had a great conversation around it. But yeah, I think
he knew all about it.
Yeah, he does. He does. That was 400 megawatts of Ohio-based solar we tried to advance on behalf of our customers. And I think we'll continue to look at it. I think the commission does have some authority if they feel like there's a need. And I think that's going to be really interesting to watch is utility scale solar renewables has its advantages, as Nick described earlier, with our large wind project out west. So I think it's, if there's a need argument, then we're gonna look hard at it.
Since Nick mentioned it, I wasn't going to mention HB6, but since it's like playing spades, you're waiting for the first person to play the spade.
I knew when you said that.
What, because of everything that's happened with HB6, because of everything that's being discussed from the Department of Justice, the trial that's about to happen, what is the state of energy policy at the State House right now? Is it, is anybody touching this? Or how do you move forward with policy that you believe is important for the state in the environment, in the climate that's happening right now when it comes to in the HB6 world?
Well, I'll certainly say, and you've all seen, and we've seen the sordid past of some of the emails and everything that gets reported. It certainly was a tainted process. We, AEP, we focused on it just like we do every other piece of legislation. We tried to be helpful. We tried to be focused on meeting with legislators to talk about a balanced energy portfolio for Ohio. We didn't own any nuclear in the state, but still, it's important to have a balanced energy portfolio. But and I'm not going to get into HB6, obviously, with what our neighbors to the north were involved with, but certainly it made the whole state look bad, and it made all the utilities look bad, and we suffered from that because we were sort of caught up in the wake of all this activity that was occurring. It was pretty distressing for us, and some of the initial reporting was not good either. But there are certainly, it's an opportunity for us, and the way I see, and Marc, you can correct me, but we've continued to engage with legislators. We've continued to engage with the Public Utility Commission of Ohio, and they've certainly been responsive because in everything that we do as a company, and this is a Washington too, and that's why we're so credible in Washington. We present things in a way that we feel like is good for the communities and the country, whether it's good for us or not. We're honest brokers from that perspective, and we'll continue to be that way. And I think it's really important for us to think about and learn from the things that have happened, and let that be the forcing function as opposed to something that we just want. And that's the way we look at it.
Yeah, I agree with what Nick said. I think, for us, with respect to HB6, really OVEC, which I know you're familiar with and is talked about a lot. OVEC, for those of you who don't know, was an entity that had two coal plants, one in Indiana, one in southern Ohio. They were built to serve the Department of Energy's uranium enrichment program. And so in 1952, 53, utilities were asked to kind of step in to that program, that contract, and maintain and operate the plants. Well, fast forward to today, OVEC, as it seems to be a lightning rod in that legislation, HB6, it's providing a credit to customers. In an inflationary environment like we're in, our customers receive 11 cents a month credit. Now you might be like 11 cents, but we expect, based on what we're seeing in power prices, et cetera, that could be up to $1 or more come January. And so it was OVEC, the mechanism in OVEC was approved by the commission well before HB6. All HB6 did was extend it 5 more years. And so when you see the volatility in other fuel mixes, the OVEC, we refer to as a hedge because that's how it's set up. We don't make any money. It all goes back to customers if it's in the money, and that's what's happening right now.
Okay. All right, well, we're going to move on to questions from our live stream and from our in-person audience in just a few minutes. If you have a question, please make your way to the microphone. And if you're watching online, please type your questions into the chat. See a lot of people lining up, so I think we can really just kind of get straight to it. I mean, I know we're a little behind, so I think we usually ask one more question, but I could just toss it straight to the audience right now if we're good. So go ahead.
All right. Thanks, Andy. From our online audience, Kevin Everhart asks, does AEP have any carbon capture and sequestration practices in place now, or do you plan to in the future?
So I guess it was probably 10 years ago, we had the first integrated carbon capture and storage process from an existing unit in the world. And we learned a lot from that because what we call the parasitic load, it basically consumed 30% of the output of the plant to make it happen. And also just to run it was very complex. Technologies have changed over the years. There's no, I doubt that we will look at carbon capture and storage for existing units because it's still expensive, it's still risky, and for many of our coal units, we've retired probably 2/3 of our coal units already. And what we would like to do is find a transition because we're very focused on the just transitional aspects of retirements of these particular areas. We have our Perky power plant in Texas that's retiring, and we had a whole community process focused on jobs, job creation, transition for communities, because when you have these coal units retire, it destroys towns. And you know, fire protection, police protection, schools, they all go away because of the taxes being paid. So because you're sort of at the tail end of some of these coal units, the best option for us is to bring something like a small modular nuclear reactor in, has the same jobs and paying the same taxes, and the communities can continue to flourish. That's what we're looking for. Carbon capture and storage will be very difficult to do with existing generation. We've proven that. Unless something changes from a technological perspective, we probably won't be doing that. Now, we continue to improve the carbon output. We have targets for 80% reduction by 2030, net zero by 2050. And we have plans to advance to that primarily because of renewables and other technologies being brought on board. And then that'll be the process that we go through.
Carol McGuire. The first time I heard the phrase load shedding was when I was in South Africa a few years ago and got caught in an elevator on the 20th floor when the electric went out. They have some very particular and somewhat severe problems currently with their electric supplies and generation in South Africa. My question really is more about how do we share technology? We're a global environment. I think we certainly can't be thinking about only what we do in Ohio, but what do we do as far as sharing best practices globally? Other countries, what do they share with us? How do we interact in understanding more about these energy needs?
Yeah, there's a lesson in South Africa. Yeah. They had a lot of industrial expansion that was going on, and they didn't keep up with it from a generation standpoint. So that led to really practically daily load shedding that occurred, which destroys economic development and the economy. We have to be concerned about that here in Ohio, particularly with the large-scale additions of Intel and all the other opportunities that we have. We've got to make sure that we're supporting that resiliency in a credible way. And as of course, the technology, the shared areas of concern that we have, I talk on a regular basis with the Germans, Italians, the French, because they go through many of the things that we're about to go through, and we learn from that. Actually, I also learned things that preconceived notions I thought were in place, because I always thought that we could only have 3 to 8% renewables because that's what Germany was doing. Well, we've gone far beyond that because of technology and because of the ability to integrate these kinds of facilities. So those technologies continue to exist. Enel in Italy, they're very focused on the customer end of things throughout the world. And we learn a lot from projects that they're doing as well. So there's a lot of sharing, and we're all going through the same things too, particularly, well, now after the war in Ukraine and the changes that are occurring in Germany and in Europe. It's showing that element of resiliency that needs to be in place. You can't depend on one particular type of technology.
From our online audience, Richard Needles asks, does AEP support Ohio House Bill 450 to build community solar panels and to eliminate HOA restrictions on solar panels?
Yeah, not in its current form, to be direct. And we're concerned about the cost shift that would occur between the customers participating in that community solar program and the customers that aren't. So, for example, you could see the cost shift from, say, Central Ohio community participating in a solar project like that. Well, there's costs that are shifted that are fixed costs and other costs that are shifted to folks in rural Ohio that might not be participating. So in its current form, we're opposed. But we, like any piece of legislation that Nick mentioned, we're going to be engaged and be thoughtful, but also look out for our customers' interests.
Hello, I'm Jeffrey Lemichuk. So I read recently that there's a growing interest in states where data mining is occurring, where these companies are coming in and doing the Bitcoin. They require huge amounts of energy to the point where it's negating any renewable. It's a wash at best. So it made me think about Columbus with our growth in population as well as industry with Intel and companies. If data mining comes here and Ohio is not in a great position for renewable energies, how do we provide the power and keep the environmental issues at the same balancing act like that?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, we're seeing crypto miners come in throughout our territories, and you're right, they are very large loads. Some of the public policy issues are that you have to make absolutely sure they're going to be there, because many of the facilities you have to build for that kind of load, you don't want to wind up with a stranded investment that other customers would have to bear. So we're really focused on how to deal with that going forward. And it's really, I would say it's a huge challenge. And for us, we've always had sort of, there are many ways that the greatest generation was in fact the greatest generation. Because a lot of the infrastructure that was built in this nation, including generation, was built during that time. And now you're in a transitional period. We're going to have to define how we satisfy those kinds of huge loads that exist. And Intel itself, I mean, 2 fab facilities could go to 8 fab facilities now that the CHIPS Act is done. That's a substantial part of load. Matter of fact, New Albany may have, I've heard numbers of upwards to 10,000 megawatts, which is about the same as the rest of our Ohio load. So when you think about that kind of activity, we have to be able to get out in front of that going forward.
We should move into our lightning round. We have a few more minutes left, but let's try to get to as many questions as possible.
I'll make this quick. First of all, thank you so much for coming. This was really, really interesting. Something that we haven't touched upon is if I was an adversarial country and I wanted to destroy a country, the first thing I would do is knock out the grid. We're so dependent on it. Without revealing any secrets, how are we prepared for that?
Yeah, so this industry is the only industry that has critical infrastructure requirements. So, and others we feel like should. And for us, cybersecurity and physical security have been areas where we've been focused on for years. There's a lot of threats out there, and you're right. Infrastructure, including the electric grid, is one of the first targets that you would try to impact society, and it scares society. I mean, if there ever was an attack, even anywhere in the country, it's going to have an effect on the way people think across the country about how safe they are. And I think when you look at, we have a huge investment that we make every year on physical security and cybersecurity. Matter of fact, one floor of that One Riverside Plaza building is cybersecurity.
I'm supposed to say that.
I'm not supposed to say that? Okay. Well, I'm not saying which floor. I'm not saying which floor. But I think the important part is that this industry, and AEP is at the forefront of this industry in terms of working with the federal government, our federal partners, using the tools of about every three-letter agency there is to focus on keeping our grid safe. And that will continue.
All right, I think we have time for one more question.
Hi guys, my name is Jake Zuckerman. I'm a reporter with the Ohio Capital Journal. I have some fresh data from the PUCO here. Since the passage of HB 6, Ohioans have paid $173 million in total to cover the losses from OVEC. Given that AEP is the largest stakeholder in those two plants, AEP lobbied heavily in support of the bill. How do you justify requiring Ohio ratepayers to cover those losses?
Well, it's a credit now to bills, and it's going to continue to be a credit as you see power prices and natural gas prices continue to climb. The mechanism is set up as a financial hedge. So there will be periods, and there have been periods, that will be a cost to customers, but it's that hedge and that protection to customers in the event you have what's happening right now when you have spikes in natural gases and power prices. That OVEC is returning money to customers. And like I said, I think we feel that based on what we're seeing, this could be $1 a month for the average customer come January.
Yeah, so I think you have to really think about, we're planning for the long term, and for us, there's going to be ebbs and flows of the of the market that exists for electricity, and every time the market is lower, people will say, well, let's deregulate, let's do all these other things. When the market's higher, no, we don't want to do that. And actually, we did that for years. And I think you have to really think about the transition and the risk management of what we do for customers, and that's to make sure that there's consistency of pricing and consistency of our ability to deliver those products. And you can look at one particular area, but there's a benefit in another area. So those kinds of things tend to work each other out. And OVEC was negative, and I think that's probably where you were thinking of. Now it's positive for customers. So it just moves back and forth, and for years, for decades, it was positive. So I think you're seeing, and now with the volatility of natural gas, which really is the only thing there is, if you retire coal, you have nuclear. No one's going to build a large-scale nuclear power plant. I know Southern companies do it at Vogtle, but they started that process early. And I think that's a challenge in today's environment. So we have to be really careful about that.
Well, thank you. We'll have to leave it there. I have a million more questions, but maybe we just get together at a park sometime and just ask more questions or something.
Yeah. Anytime, Andy.
But I'll turn it over to Tony now.
Thank you, Andy. Well, for everyone, I hope that you found today's forum enlightening and electrifying. But I'm bummed. You're the best crowd. You're the first one that's ever laughed. Thank you. I learned that reliability, resiliency are vital, as well as technology and infrastructure. I also learned that sometimes running an electric company is like running a marathon with clogged arteries. So I'd like to say a big thank you to today's sponsors, Accenture, who's leading through change, the law offices of Steptoe and Johnson, and of course, the Columbus Partnership. Thank you also to our online virtual seat patrons, and to the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation, and for our presenting live stream partner, the Columbus, in partnership with Columbus Dispatch. And our very special appreciation for today's speakers, Nick Akins, Marc Reitter, and of course our host, Andy Chow. Thank you very much. So for all of you, when you go home, and you flick on the light and you do whatever you're going to do, just, thank these two plus their entire team. There's a lot more that goes into electricity than just flicking the switch. So please make sure you have plans to join us next Wednesday for Columbus's housing strategy, featuring introductory remarks by our very own Mayor Andrew J. Ginther. And thank you all for joining us. We could certainly not do this without you. We look forward to seeing you next Wednesday as the Columbus Metropolitan Club presents another wonderful community conversation. Thank you.